My daughter-in-law, Donna. I never thought her name would one day make my stomach turn. My son passed away 10 years ago. Every year, I sent my daughter-in-law $100,000 to help care for my grandchildren. One day, my wife grabbed my sleeve and whispered, "Husband, stop sending money to our daughter-in-law." What I discovered afterward horrified me. I'm Walter Johnson, 72 years old, living in Spokane, Washington. Our family used to be the kind people envied: loud Thanksgivings, weekend barbecues, my son Daniel always laughing louder than everyone else. Then, one rainy night 10 years ago, everything changed. The call came that Daniel was gone. Just like that. For the next decade, I kept my promise. Every January, I wired $100,000 straight into Donna's account. I told myself it was for my granddaughter, for the life my boy would have wanted her to have. I did it with these same hands that built our family business from nothing. I did it because I believed that was the only piece of my son I had left to protect. My wife never said much about the money. She just watched. Until that ordinary afternoon when her fingers tightened around my arm and those quiet words slipped out. No explanation. No raised voice. Just that single sentence hanging in the air between us. I laughed it off at first. "What are you talking about?" But the look in her eyes stopped me cold. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time. And I was about to find out just how wrong. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, if this story already has you leaning in, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the full truth. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had a gut feeling something wasn't right in your own family? Let me know down below. It really helps the channel. Deborah's words still sat between us like an uninvited guest. She reached out and took my arm firmly, her voice dropping to almost nothing as she said it again. "Husband, stop sending money to our daughter-in-law." I stared at her, waiting for more, but she only shook her head once and turned back to the dishes in the sink. No raised voice, no long explanation, just that quiet sentence and the way her shoulders stayed tight. I asked her straight out what she meant. She didn't answer. She just kept washing the same plate over and over until I finally walked out of the kitchen. I ended up in the living room by myself, the house quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I dropped into the old armchair and let my eyes move across the photos on the mantel. 10 years had passed since the night the phone rang and the officer told me Daniel was gone. I could still hear the exact tone of his voice, calm and professional, delivering the news that turned our world inside out. The funeral in Spokane had been simple, just family and a few close friends standing under gray skies. I remembered signing the papers afterward, arranging everything so Donna could focus on raising Natalie. That was when I started the transfers. $100,000 every January, wired directly into her account with a note that it was for my granddaughter's needs. I never questioned it. I believed it was the least I could do for the life my son had left behind. Now, Deborah's warning made me look at those years differently. I stood up and went to the desk in the corner, the one with the deep bottom drawer full of old files. I pulled the drawer open and started sorting through the stack of bank statements. Page after page showed the same pattern, year after year, the money leaving my account and landing in hers. The amounts never changed. The memo lines were always the same. I kept digging. There were the insurance forms from right after the accident, the death certificate with the county seal, and a few old letters Donna had sent in the first year, thanking me for the support and attaching school pictures of Natalie. Everything looked exactly as it should. Yet the more I read, the heavier the feeling in my chest became. Why would my wife say something like that now? After a full decade of watching me send the money without a single complaint, I closed the folder and sat back, rubbing my forehead. The doubt was new and it tasted bitter. Donna had always been polite on the phone, quick to update me about Natalie's grades and activities. She never asked for extra, and she never complained. I had trusted her completely because she was the one Daniel chose. But Deborah's silence tonight cracked that trust just enough to let questions slip in. I wondered if I had missed signs all along. Maybe the new house Donna bought a couple years back was bigger than I realized. Maybe the car she drove when she visited last summer cost more than it should have. I hadn't paid attention to those details before. Now they felt important. I stayed in that chair for a long time, the papers still spread across the desk. The living room grew darker as evening settled over Spokane. I thought about calling Donna right then, asking her directly if everything was all right with the money. My hand even reached for the phone on the side table, but I stopped myself. Something told me to wait, to look a little harder before I said anything. The unease kept building, quiet but steady, the kind that settles in your gut and refuses to leave. For the first time in 10 years, I was looking at my daughter-in-law with different eyes, and I didn't like what I was starting to see. I finally stacked the papers and slid the drawer shut. The house was completely quiet now. Deborah had gone upstairs without another word. I sat alone with the new questions turning slowly in my mind, each one heavier than the last. I knew I couldn't ignore them anymore. The next morning, I sat down at the computer. I logged into the online banking portal and loaded every statement from the past decade. The transfers appeared in a long column, each one leaving my account on the exact same January date. I opened a second tab and searched Spokane County Public Records. The property deed showed up immediately. Donna had bought a much larger house in the North Subdivision 2 years earlier. The recorded sale price was higher than anything she had ever mentioned during our calls. I kept searching and found the vehicle registration for a premium SUV purchased with cash right after one of the transfers. School records came next. The private academy Natalie attended listed tuition amounts that seemed far too high for a single child. Additional charges appeared for family trips, new furniture, and home upgrades that never matched the modest updates Donna usually gave me about my granddaughter's routine. I left the laptop open and walked into the kitchen. Deborah was at the counter slicing vegetables for lunch. "You need to see these records," I said. She wiped her hands and followed me back to the desk without asking questions. We sat side by side while I clicked through each document. Deborah leaned forward and pointed to the dates on the larger purchases. She noted how every major expense lined up shortly after the January transfer. I pulled up the school invoices again, and we compared the numbers to the simple stories Donna had shared about Natalie's activities. The mismatch became clearer with every line we read. We discussed the house size and how Donna had never once described the move to a bigger place. The SUV was another surprise because she had always said her old sedan was still reliable. We kept going through the files, noting each unusual item and trying to find any reasonable explanation. The conversation stayed quiet and focused on the facts in front of us. Deborah suggested we make a simple list of questions as we went. I grabbed a notepad and wrote down everything that stood out. Why the sudden upgrades after years of the same routine? Why the silence about the new lifestyle? We spent a long time reviewing the last 3 years in detail. The pattern was consistent, and it raised more doubts than answers. Deborah sat back after we finished the final statement. She looked at me and said the numbers simply didn't add up to the life Donna had described. I closed the browser tabs and reached for the phone on the desk. I dialed my old friend, Paul Mitchell, the retired detective who used to work out of the Spokane precinct. When he answered, I explained that I had some family financial questions and needed his experience to look into them quietly. He didn't press for details over the line. He simply agreed to stop by the house the following morning. I hung up and told Deborah the plan was set. Paul knew how to check records without raising flags. We would get the answers we needed before taking any further steps. The rest of the afternoon passed with the records still fresh in my thoughts. I organized the notes we had made and placed them in the top drawer. The house felt steadier now that a clear next move was in place. I knew Paul's visit would bring more information, and I intended to be ready for whatever he found. The unease from the previous night had turned into a focused plan, and for the first time I felt we were actually moving forward instead of guessing in the dark. I spent the remaining hours thinking about the questions we would ask and the best way to approach the situation without alerting Donna. The pieces were starting to connect, and I was determined to see the full picture, no matter where it led. Paul Mitchell arrived right on time the following morning. He carried a thin folder and sat down at the kitchen table without small talk. Deborah poured fresh coffee while I pulled out the notes from yesterday. Paul opened his folder and spread several printed pages across the table. He pointed to the property records first and explained that Donna still owned the original house on the east side of Spokane, in addition to the newer one in the north subdivision. The utility bills for the older property showed consistent monthly usage for electricity and water over the past 10 years, far more than an empty house would require. Paul had also checked vehicle registrations and found a second car listed at the east side address under a different name. He slid another sheet forward showing Tyler Reed as the registered owner of that vehicle. The name meant nothing to me at first, until Paul mentioned that Tyler worked at the same company Donna had joined after the accident. Public records listed Tyler and Donna as joint signers on a storage unit contract near the old house. Paul kept his voice steady as he described how these connections appeared only after cross-referencing multiple databases. He emphasized that everything so far was legal public information and no laws had been broken by looking. We spent the next hour going through each document Paul had gathered. Deborah asked about the storage unit, and Paul confirmed it was large enough for furniture or other household items. He suggested the consistent utility use at the old house indicated someone might still be living there, or at least visiting regularly. I asked if he could check visitor patterns without drawing attention. Paul nodded and said he knew a couple of retired officers who could drive by discreetly during different times of day. He warned that we should not contact Donna or visit the properties ourselves yet because any sudden change in routine could alert her. We agreed to let Paul coordinate the initial surveillance while we stayed in the background. Paul collected his papers and promised to call with updates as soon as his contacts reported back. Before he left, he reminded me that these situations often had simple explanations, but the pattern warranted careful checking. After Paul drove away, Deborah and I remained at the table. We reviewed the new information and noted how the old house had never come up in any conversation with Donna over the years. The addition of Tyler Reed's name had added another layer we had not expected. We discussed the best way to stay patient and avoid any direct questions that might reach Donna. The afternoon passed with normal household tasks, but my mind kept returning to the east side address and the unexplained utility bills. Deborah suggested we focus on Natalie's upcoming school events as a safe topic if Donna called. I agreed, because maintaining normal contact prevented suspicion. By late afternoon, I stepped outside to clear my head in the backyard. The ordinary sounds of the neighborhood continued around me while the new details turned slowly in my thoughts. Paul's findings had moved us forward without creating immediate conflict. I knew the next reports from his contacts would bring more clarity about the old house and the person connected to Tyler Reed. The house felt steadier with each piece of information we gathered, even as the questions continued to grow. I returned inside as evening approached, ready for whatever Paul discovered next. The plan remained quiet and methodical, and I intended to follow it step by step until we understood exactly what was happening at the old property. We decided to act on the weekend. Paul picked me up early Saturday morning, and we drove across town in his unmarked sedan. We parked 2 blocks away from the old house on the east side and waited with binoculars. Donna's newer SUV appeared around 10 o'clock and turned into the driveway of the older property. She stepped out carrying 2 large grocery bags and a backpack. A few minutes later, Tyler Reed arrived in the second car, listed in the records. He carried toolboxes and what looked like folded blankets. They both entered the house through the side door and stayed inside for nearly 2 hours. We noted the exact times and took clear photographs from our position without leaving the vehicle. When they finally came out, Donna locked the door while Tyler loaded empty containers into his trunk. They drove off separately, and we followed Donna at a safe distance until she returned to her main residence in the North Subdivision. Paul suggested we move closer on foot after dark. We waited until well after sunset and walked the quiet street with flashlights off. The neighborhood was older, and the houses sat farther apart, so our approach stayed hidden behind trees and fences. We stopped at the back corner of the property and listened. Low voices came from inside, but we could not make out the words. Paul pointed to a small basement window with a faint light glowing behind heavy curtains. We crouched low and watched as shadows moved across the glass. Tyler Reed appeared briefly at the main door, carrying another bag, before disappearing inside again. The pattern repeated several times, with both of them entering and exiting at different intervals. We documented every movement and returned to the car only when the lights inside finally went dark. The drive back to my house felt longer than usual. Paul reviewed the photos on his camera and confirmed the activity matched the utility records we had seen earlier. He advised against any immediate confrontation because we still lacked direct proof of what was happening inside. We agreed to schedule another observation the following weekend with better equipment for recording sound from a greater distance. Paul dropped me off and reminded me to keep all contact with Donna completely normal in the meantime. I walked inside and found Deborah waiting in the living room. We sat together and went over the day's events without raising our voices. She asked specific questions about the bags and the timing, while I described exactly what we had witnessed. The conversation stayed practical and focused on planning the next steps carefully. Sunday passed with ordinary errands and a quiet dinner. I answered a short call from Donna about Natalie's upcoming soccer game and kept my tone steady. She mentioned nothing unusual, and I did the same. The contrast between her casual voice and the images from Saturday sat heavy in my mind, but I held back every question. Paul sent a text late that evening, confirming he had arranged for a retired colleague to help with the next surveillance. The new information had sharpened our focus without creating panic. We now had visual evidence of regular activity at the old house and the involvement of Tyler Reed. Each piece fit into the growing picture, and we prepared to gather more without alerting anyone. The weekend had moved us forward in a controlled way, and I felt the situation shifting under our feet even as the surface remained calm. That same night, we returned to the East Side property. Paul and I parked farther away this time and approached the backyard through a narrow alley. The house sat dark except for one basement window that leaked a thin strip of light. We moved quietly along the side fence until we reached a spot where the curtains hung slightly crooked. I leaned forward first and peered through the narrow gap. Inside the cramped space, My son Daniel sat on a thin mattress with his back against the concrete wall. His clothes hung loose on a frame much thinner than I remembered, and a short chain connected his ankle to a metal pipe. He stared at the floor without moving, while faint sounds of movement came from the floor above. I pulled back and let Paul look. He confirmed the same sight and motioned for us to retreat before anyone noticed. We slipped back to the car in silence and drove several blocks before either of us spoke. The image stayed burned in my mind during the entire ride home. Daniel had been alive all these years while I believed the worst. The chain and the basement conditions explained the utility bills and the regular deliveries we had observed. Paul kept his eyes on the road and said we needed to establish contact without alerting Donna or Tyler Reed. He suggested using a small wireless device that could be passed through the window on the next visit. We discussed the risks of being seen and agreed to wait 2 days until midweek when the neighborhood activity dropped. Paul would prepare the device, and I would handle the brief conversation if the chance appeared. 2 nights later, we returned under heavier cloud cover. Paul handed me the small earpiece and transmitter before we left the car. We repeated the alley approach and reached the same basement window. The light was on again, and Daniel sat in the same position. I tapped lightly on the glass 3 times. He lifted his head slowly and looked toward the sound. I whispered his name through the gap and told him it was me. His eyes widened, but he stayed silent until he confirmed no one was coming down the stairs. He moved closer to the window and listened while I explained we had been watching the house and knew about Donna and Tyler. Daniel kept his voice low and confirmed he had been held there since the night they staged the accident. He described how they used the insurance money and my annual transfers to maintain the secret. I asked if he could wear a small recording device during their next visit. He agreed immediately and said the chain allowed enough movement to hide it under his shirt. We passed the device through the narrow opening, and he secured it quickly. We left the area within minutes and drove straight back. Paul checked the signal from the transmitter and confirmed it worked from a safe distance. Daniel now had a direct line to record any conversation inside the house. The discovery hit harder than any financial record or distant observation. Seeing my son alive but trapped changed everything in a single moment. We spent the rest of the night reviewing the recording setup and planning the exact moment to involve the authorities. The situation had moved from suspicion to clear evidence, and we prepared to act before another day passed in that basement. Daniel signaled through the device the very next afternoon. He whispered that Donna and Tyler Reed were both upstairs, and the timing felt right. I stayed in Paul's car 2 blocks away, while the transmitter fed "iya" at every word directly to us. Daniel started the conversation by asking Donna why the chain had grown tighter over the years. Her voice came through sharp and defensive as she told him the arrangement kept everyone safe. Tyler Reed joined in and reminded Daniel that any attempt to leave would destroy the financial support he still received. Daniel kept his tone calm and pressed them on the original plan from 10 years ago. Donna admitted the staged accident had allowed them to collect the insurance payout and my annual transfers without interference. Tyler Reed added that the basement setup prevented questions from neighbors or authorities. The recording captured every detail of how they divided the money and maintained the lie about Daniel's death. When the conversation reached its peak, Daniel revealed he had spoken with me through the window. Donna's reaction turned immediate and panicked. She demanded to know how contact happened, while Tyler Reed started searching the room for any hidden device. Daniel stayed seated and continued speaking clearly into the transmitter. He described the years of isolation and the control they had exercised over his life. The argument escalated as Donna accused him of betrayal and Tyler Reed threatened to tighten security further. Their voices overlapped until heavy footsteps moved toward the basement stairs. At that exact moment, Paul placed the call to the Spokane Police Department with the recorded evidence already queued. Officers arrived within minutes and entered the property through the front door. We watched from the car as they secured the scene and brought Donna and Tyler Reed out in handcuffs. Daniel was carefully freed from the chain and escorted upstairs for medical checks. I stepped out of the vehicle only after the officers confirmed the area was safe. The sight of my son standing in daylight after 10 years hit with full force, but I kept my focus on the statements the police needed. Daniel provided a clear account, while the recording played as supporting evidence. The officers noted the false imprisonment and the financial deception as they processed the scene. Donna remained silent during transport, and Tyler Reed demanded a lawyer immediately. Paul and I followed the police vehicles to the station to give formal statements. The detective in charge reviewed the transmitter recording and confirmed it met the requirements for admissible evidence. Daniel received immediate medical attention and temporary housing arrangements while the investigation continued. The swift response from the department prevented any further harm and secured the key witnesses on site. The events of that afternoon closed the long period of secrecy and moved the situation into official channels. Every step followed legal procedure, and the recorded confrontation supplied the necessary proof for charges. The case moved through the Spokane County court system the following spring. Donna and Tyler Reed faced formal charges of wire fraud and false imprisonment. The recorded confrontation served as primary evidence, along with the financial records and witness statements. Daniel testified about the 10 years he spent in the basement and described the control they had maintained over his life. The judge reviewed the chain, the utility logs, and the pattern of transfers from my account. Sentencing took place in a closed session to protect Natalie from additional trauma. Donna received 18 years in state prison, while Tyler Reed received 15 years for his role in the deception and confinement. Both lost all parental rights and were ordered to pay full restitution for the misused funds. I attended every hearing without speaking to either of them. After the verdict, I signed the paperwork to assume permanent guardianship of Natalie. She moved into our home in Spokane and began regular counseling sessions arranged through the court. Daniel stayed in transitional housing provided by social services, while he regained strength and worked with doctors on long-term recovery. We kept our daily routines simple and focused on rebuilding a stable environment for Natalie without any contact from her mother. The court issued permanent no-contact orders that prevented Donna or Tyler Reed from reaching out in any form. The financial impact took months to resolve. The restitution order directed recovered assets toward Natalie's future needs and Daniel's medical expenses. I closed the old accounts and restructured my own support to go directly through legal channels. Life in Spokane settled into a quieter pattern once the legal proceedings ended. Natalie started at a new school closer to our neighborhood and gradually spoke more openly about her experiences. Daniel visited regularly and participated in family activities as his health improved. We never discussed reconciliation or second chances because the damage ran too deep for any return to normal. Looking back at the entire situation, I learned that ignoring a quiet warning can allow years of harm to continue unchecked. Family trust requires constant attention, and when something feels wrong, it deserves immediate careful examination. The legal system in Washington state handled the case through standard procedures and delivered consequences that matched the severity of the actions. False imprisonment combined with sustained fraud carries heavy penalties for good reason. We now live with clearer boundaries and a stronger commitment to open communication within our immediate circle. Natalie deserves a childhood free from the secrets that defined her early years, and Daniel deserves the opportunity to rebuild without looking over his shoulder. The chapter with Donna and Tyler Reed closed permanently on the day of sentencing, and we have kept it that way ever since.